They say the road to hell is paved with good intentions, but for Ifeoma, it was paved with crisp naira notes and the stranger's peculiar obsession with her breasts. In the bustling metropolis of Lagos, where dreams glittered like diamonds in the African sun, a young woman named Ifeoma arrived fresh from university, her degree still crisp in its holder. The city's towering skyscrapers and luxury cars that zoomed past her modest apartment seemed to whisper promises of a life she desperately wanted, but couldn't quite reach. Ifeoma had done everything right, or so she thought. She'd studied diligently, graduated with honors, and secured a respectable position at a well-known company. Her parents, back in their modest home, were proud of their daughter's achievements. But as she watched her colleagues drive home in their sleek cars and caught glimpses of Lagos elite through the windows of exclusive restaurants, something inside her began to shift. Her salary, while decent, barely covered her basic needs in the expensive city. Each morning, as she dressed in her carefully budgeted office attire, she would gaze longingly at fashion magazines showcasing the latest designer clothes. Her small apartment, though clean and functional, felt worlds away from the high-rise penthouses she dreamed of calling home. Determination burned in her eyes as she began her mission to bridge the gap between her reality and her desires. Ifeoma started attending every networking event she could find, from corporate mixers to charity galas. She would spend her last naira on the perfect outfit, practice her smile in the mirror, and rehearse her elevator pitch until it flowed like honey. Evening after evening, she would navigate these social gatherings with practiced grace, laughing at the right moments, nodding at the right times, all while scanning the room for that one connection that could change everything. She became a regular at these events, known for her charm and ambition, always positioned near the influential crowd, always ready to seize an opportunity. Her friend watched this transformation with growing concern. She saw how Ifeoma's eyes would light up at the mention of wealth, how she would lean forward eagerly when someone spoke of business opportunities or investment chances. I recognized the hunger in her friend's eyes, the desperate need to belong to a world that seemed just out of reach. What Ifeoma didn't realize was that her networking efforts were indeed about to pay off, but not in the way she had imagined. As she stood at another lavish party, sipping champagne she could barely afford, fate was about to introduce her to a mysterious man named Efet. This encounter would fulfill all her material desires, but at a price she could never have anticipated. The lights of Lagos continued to sparkle, but they now seemed to hold a different kind of promise, one that would lead Ifeoma down a path from which there might be no return. Her story was about to take a dark turn, proving that sometimes the things we want most desperately are the very things that can destroy us. The mysterious deal. The night that changed Ifeoma's life began like any other networking event. Crystal glasses clinked, laughter echoed across marble floors, and the air was heavy with expensive perfume. But tonight was different. Tonight she met Efet. He stood apart from the usual crowd, commanding attention without seeking it. Something about his presence made the room seem to tilt slightly, like a painting hung just a fraction off center. When their eyes met across the room, Ifeoma felt a peculiar sensation, as if someone had walked over her grave. Yet she found herself drawn to him, pulled by an invisible thread of curiosity and opportunity. His invitation to his hotel room later that evening should have raised red flags, but desperation has a way of painting warning signs in softer colors. In the hotel's dim lighting, Efet's proposition hung in the air between them like smoke. No romance, no relationship, just a simple request that seemed almost absurd in its simplicity. "I just want to play with your breasts," he said matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. "That's all I want, and all this money will be yours." The sum he mentioned made her head spin. Ifeoma's mind raced. It seemed too easy, too good to be true. "That's all I have to do. Nothing more," she wondered aloud, her voice barely a whisper. When he nodded, the decision crystallized in her mind like sugar in hot water. One strange request, one moment of discomfort, in exchange for the life she'd been chasing. It seemed like a bargain. The transaction itself was mechanical, almost clinical. True to his word, Efet transferred the money immediately after. Ifeoma checked her account balance repeatedly that night, watching the zeros line up like soldiers, hardly believing her eyes. She had done it, found her shortcut to wealth. Over the next 4 months, their arrangement repeated 7 times. Each encounter followed the same script: his call, the hotel room, his singular focus on her breasts, and then the staggering transfer of money. Yet despite these intimate moments, Ifet remained the cipher. He never spoke about himself, never asked about her life, never showed interest in anything beyond their strange arrangement. He was like a ghost who materialized only to fulfill their contract before vanishing again. The mystery surrounding him should have troubled her more. In a city like Lagos, where everyone was connected to someone, Ifet seemed to exist in isolation. No social media presence, no mutual friends, no trace of his life beyond their encounters. After each meeting, he would dismiss her immediately, as if her presence beyond their arrangement was an inconvenience. But Ifeoma didn't dwell on these oddities. Her bank account was growing exponentially, and with it, her dreams were becoming reality. She was too busy shopping for designer clothes and touring luxury apartments to question the source of her sudden fortune. After all, she reasoned, some people just valued their privacy. She didn't realize that she had entered into a bargain far more sinister than she could imagine, and that the price would be higher than any amount of money could justify. Initial signs of trouble. After the 7th encounter, the rhythm of Ifeoma's newfound lifestyle was suddenly disrupted. Ifet vanished like morning mist under a hot sun. No calls, no messages, no trace. At first she wasn't concerned. The millions in her account provided enough comfort to dull any worry. Besides, she reasoned, wealthy men were often unpredictable. Perhaps he had simply found what he was looking for and moved on. But the universe has a way of sending warnings, subtle at first, then increasingly difficult to ignore. The first sign came during a visit to her friend Chidima's home. 2-year-old Ara, normally a cheerful toddler who brightened rooms with her infectious giggles, reacted to Ifeoma's presence in a way that sent chills down everyone's spine. The moment Ifeoma stepped into the room, Ara's smile vanished. The child's eyes widened with an almost adult-like recognition of something wrong, something dangerous. Her small face crumpled, and she began to wail, not the typical tantrum of a toddler, but a bone-chilling cry of genuine fear. When others tried to comfort her, she allowed their touch, but the moment Ifeoma came near, the screams intensified. "I've never seen her act like this," Chidima said, confusion and concern mixing in her voice as she cradled her distressed daughter. Ifeoma laughed it off, making jokes about not being good with children, but something about the incident settled in her chest like a cold stone. Then came the pain. It started one morning as she was getting dressed for another day of living her newfound luxury lifestyle. A heaviness in her chest different from anything she'd felt before, accompanied by a strange sensation that seemed to radiate through her back. It felt as if something was slowly pressing against her ribcage from the inside, trying to expand beyond the confines of her body. Concerned but not yet alarmed, Ifeoma visited the hospital. The doctors ran their tests, prescribed painkillers, and sent her home with reassurances. For a brief moment, it seemed their medicine worked. The pain subsided, and she returned to work, pushing the incident to the back of her mind alongside the memory of Ara's crying. But deep down, in the quiet moments when she was alone with her thoughts, Ifeoma couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. The weight in her chest wasn't just physical, it carried an otherworldly quality that made her skin crawl when she thought about it too long. Sometimes, in the dead of night, she would wake up feeling as if someone or something was watching her, waiting. These were just the beginning signs, the first ripples of a storm that was gathering force. Like a character in a horror story who dismisses the early warnings, Ifeoma tried to rationalize these events, to fit them into the normal pattern of life. But soon, very soon, she would discover that there was nothing normal about what was happening to her, and that her encounters with Ifet had set in motion something far more terrifying than she could have imagined: deteriorating health. The descent into horror began with an itch. At first, it was just a minor irritation in Ifeoma's breasts, something she tried to ignore, but the itching grew more intense with each passing day, becoming a maddening sensation that no amount of scratching could relieve. It felt as if thousands of invisible insects were crawling beneath her skin, burrowing deeper with every attempt to soothe the discomfort. Then came the growth. Her breasts began to swell at an alarming rate, expanding beyond any natural explanation. What started as a slight change soon became impossible to hide. Her bras became useless one after another, each new size quickly outgrown. The weight became unbearable, forcing her to support them with her hands just to stand upright. Her once straight posture curved under the unnatural burden, her spine bending like a tree in a storm. The pain was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It wasn't just the physical strain of carrying the ever-increasing weight, it was something deeper, more sinister. The sensation was like hot pepper had been rubbed into her flesh, a burning that penetrated to her very core. Even the softest fabric felt like sandpaper against her sensitive skin, making every movement a lesson in agony. But perhaps the most horrifying development was the smell. It started subtly, a faint, unfamiliar odor that she initially attributed to her clothes or surroundings. However, as days passed, the smell intensified, becoming unmistakably tied to her condition. It was the stench of decay, as if something within her was rotting while she still lived. The odor followed her like a cloud, causing people to recoil involuntarily when she passed. Desperate for help, Ifeoma went from hospital to hospital, each visit more demoralizing than the last. She watched as doctor after doctor examined her with increasing bewilderment, their confident professional demeanors crumbling as they confronted something beyond their medical understanding. They ordered tests, blood work, biopsies, scans, but the results always came back inconclusive or normal, a cruel joke given her obviously deteriorating condition. Some doctors suggested psychological evaluations implying the changes might be in her head. Others prescribed creams and medications that proved useless, sometimes even making the symptoms worse. A few simply refused to treat her, backing away with poorly concealed fear in their eyes, as if her condition might be contagious. In her darkest moments, alone in her room, Ifeoma would catch glimpses of herself in the mirror, her once beautiful figure now grotesquely transformed, her shoulders hunched under the weight of her affliction. The luxury apartment she had been so proud to acquire became her prison, its elegant furnishings mocking reminders of the price she had unknowingly agreed to pay. As she lay in her bed each night, struggling to find a position that didn't cause pain, the truth began to dawn on her. This was no ordinary illness. Whatever was happening to her body defied medical science, and its cause lay in realms beyond the reach of conventional medicine. The realization brought with it a terrifying question. What exactly had she invited into her life during those encounters with Ifet? Was seeking help. In desperation, Ifeoma found herself in the dimly lit room of a traditional healer, the air heavy with incense and ancient wisdom. The old man's eyes seemed to pierce through her physical form, seeing something that made him recoil slightly. His words fell like stones in a still pond. My child, you have crossed a line that not even the gods can easily erase. You entered into a covenant, a pact sealed with forces beyond your understanding. The truth of his words struck her like a physical blow. Each encounter with Ifet hadn't just been a transaction, it had been a ritual, each time surrendering a piece of her life force in exchange for wealth. The mysterious man had been feeding on her essence, taking not just her body but fragments of her very soul. With nowhere else to turn, Ifeoma returned to her parents' home. The moment she crossed the threshold, her father, a proud, strong man who had worked honestly all his life, froze at the sight of his daughter. Her mother's wails echoed through the house as they witnessed what their child had become. Ifeoma, we gave you everything we could. Her father's voice cracked with emotion. Was it not enough? Did you not know that shortcuts in life come with prices far greater than what is shown? Hope flickered briefly when they heard of a powerful medicine man in a distant village. The journey was arduous, but her parents, clinging to any chance of saving their only daughter, gathered their resources and took her there. The medicine man's ritual was intense, cuts made on her back, face, hands and legs, accompanied by powerful chants that seemed to make the very air vibrate. For a moment, it seemed to work. Ifeoma felt something dark and heavy lifting from her chest, like a python unwinding its coils from around her heart. The medicine man collapsed from exhaustion after the ritual, warning her with his remaining strength the spirit has retreated, but it watches. Live humbly, or it will return to claim what it believes is its own. But the relief was temporary. Within a week, her condition deteriorated to levels worse than before. The weight in her breasts became unbearable, the pain excruciating. The smell of decay grew so strong that her father had to build an open shed where she could stay, away from the house. Neighbors complained about the odor, and visitors stopped coming. In the depths of her agony, Ifeoma reflected on her choices. The designer clothes she had bought now lay unworn in expensive suitcases. The luxury she had craved had turned to ash in her mouth. As she lay in her makeshift shelter, watching the stars through gaps in the roof, she wondered if this was how her story would end, a cautionary tale about the price of greed. But fate, or perhaps divine intervention, had one more turn in store for her. The sound of prayers from a nearby church would soon offer an unexpected glimmer of hope in her darkest hour. Final resolution. Hope first came to Ifeoma in whispers, the sound of distant prayers floating through the night air. She noticed something peculiar during the Wednesday morning and Friday night prayer sessions at the nearby church. Her pain would mysteriously subside, as if an invisible force was being pushed back by the faithful's entreaties to God. Clinging to this discovery like a drowning person to a lifeline, she begged her parents to take her to the church. As they helped her through the doors, the pastor approached, his face showing not disgust at her condition, but pure compassion. Leave her in God's care, he told her parents. When human medicine fails, divine intervention prevails. The church became her sanctuary. Day and night she remained there, surrounded by the constant hum of prayers and hymns. The congregation, instead of shunning her, embraced her presence, their faith unwavering in the face of her affliction. Each prayer session felt like cool water on a burning wound, providing temporary relief from her torment. The breakthrough came during a Friday night prayer vigil. As the congregation's voices rose in fervent prayer, something within Ifeoma began to stir. The heat in her chest intensified to an unbearable degree as she collapsed to the floor, her body writhing as if in the grip of an invisible force. The pastor, recognizing the moment of spiritual warfare, placed his hands on her, his voice thundering with authority as he commanded the dark forces to release their hold. What happened next would be talked about in the church for years to come. Ifeoma felt as if something was being physically pulled from her body, not with the violence of her previous attempts at healing, but with the gentle yet irresistible force of dawn breaking through darkness. She lay on the floor, exhausted but transformed, tears streaming down her face as peace flooded her being for the first time in months. The healing that followed was gradual but undeniable. First, the terrible odor vanished, as if it had been nothing but a bad dream. Then, day by day, her breasts began to return to their normal size, the sores healing and disappearing without leaving a single scar. Strength returned to her body, and the curve in her spine straightened as the unnatural weight lifted. When her parents visited weeks later, they found a different woman from the one they had left. Their daughter stood straight and strong, her eyes clear and bright, filled with a wisdom that only comes from walking through fire and emerging purified. Ifeoma never returned to her luxury apartment or her former life of extravagance. Instead, she dedicated herself to a higher purpose, sharing her story with anyone who would listen. In churches, schools, and community centers, she spoke of the dangerous allure of quick wealth and the hidden cost of greed. Her testimony became a powerful warning. Sometimes the things we chase hardest are the very things that can destroy us. Wealth and luxury mean nothing, she would tell her listeners, her voice carrying the weight of hard-won truth, if they cost us our souls.